Alright YouTube, it's time for a video on young earth creationism, alternative theories to the creation of existence, to the creation of man, uh, aliens, occultism, all that good stuff that people constantly comment on my videos about. I've been getting a lot of, first let me clear up a few things. For any of my critics who have actually bothered to subscribe me, or who actually bother to watch new videos that I make. First misconception about me is that I'm a devil worshiper and I believe in the Christian Satan. That's not true. I left Satanism, I've explained this before. That doesn't mean I dislike satanic philosophy. I left that in favor of general occultism. I'm very pro-pagan. I haven't chosen a specific path because my own beliefs and my own desires go beyond any specific religious group, any specific school of occultism. So I embrace it all and I study it all and I derive my own conclusions from it. From Eastern religion, Western, everything. So I don't believe in the Christian Satan. My own feelings on this figure is that it's simply a perversion of figures like Prometheus, Enki, Seth, all of these other figures from pagan antiquity, and that those beings likely are essentially recording extraterrestrial beings that came down in the past. If you look at all these cultures, they talk literally about these gods being physical, literally coming from the sky. Some refer to them as sky people or star people or whatever. And they're quite clear that these are physical beings that simply have great power. They refer to them as gods because they don't have any other term for them, because they're so far beyond mankind and their abilities. One other misconception being people today often think a god has to be singular. For one, there can only be one. That it has to be capable of creating all existence, that it's immortal, timeless, all-powerful, it never goes away. It's not really truly physical, although it can take physical form, as you see in the Bible or any of these other texts. That's not the case. Actually, that's a fairly new idea within religions of the modern age, dating back to Judaistic times. Although the Jews were henotheists, they were not monotheists. That's something that people don't seem to understand. Even Zoroastrianism, which is often seen as the root of a lot of the modern morality, was not strictly monotheistic. There were two major deities, each with their host of angelic and demonic forces, so it could be said to be polytheistic too. Christianity could be said to be polytheistic for those who believe that Jesus and the Father God and are separate. Of course, Satan is also immortal. He just ends up suffering forever. He's technically a god of sorts, just an evil god. I believe there's no such thing as monotheism. There are no monotheistic religions in the world. They're all polytheistic. When you really look at them, all the angels and demons are basically deities of some sort. Another misconception being that I'm an atheist. I'm not an atheist, but I'm not a theist either. I don't believe in or worship any specific god. So much as I remain agnostic on these topics, I derive my own conclusions from what I study, which is a vast pool of literature from dozens of different backgrounds, and I have no intention of stopping. People seem to think, and this is common to Christians, it's common to Muslims, it's common to everybody, they look at their religions as the end game, as the end of a path. Once they choose that religion, they are enlightened, they are saved, they are whatever, they continue that till they die, and then forever is infinite, heavenly, everything they could ever want. I look at spirituality and the occult as a path, a multi-branch path that has no end. The paths simply branch off forever, and I can go down any which one I want. I can explore forever. I believe strongly in reincarnation. I have my own reasons for believing in that. I don't ask that others, blindly accept that. I would say, in my own belief system, they should study for themselves and they should find what works for them. If they want to be a Christian, so be it. But Christians and Muslims particularly, come to my page. They spam all this nonsense, their young earth bullshit with Kent Hovind and all these other bullshit artists. They don't know what they're talking about. They mix logic and science, they attempt to mix science with spirituality. They're doing it the wrong way. Their idea is the exact polar opposite of what science does. Science, most often, comes to a logical conclusion about the world around us, evolution, anything like that. And it says spirituality doesn't know what it's talking about and has no place in science whatsoever. Spiritual people, the evangelicals, the young earth creationists, the hardcore Muslims, all these different groups that we're used to, they say, no, 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 our book is correct, and if science disagrees with it, science is wrong. The two can't mix, and some of them go even further, and they try to bend science to their whim, like people like the young earth creationists, who are constantly talking about, oh, here's evidence that dinosaurs and humans coexisted, which is nonsense. The proper way to look at it is science and spirituality are separate. Yes, they have their own separate functions. Where they mix is where you want to look. And every occult school seems to have come to this same conclusion, that the two are inseparable in some areas. That's what that's what the Nazis delved into. That's what the Thule Society delved into. That's what the Vedic groups delved into, alchemy, all of these things, some of which ironically led to modern science and modern spiritual thinking. This fusion between the two forces, and you can look at them as the feminine and the masculine forces. The true spiritual force is the feminine. That's how it's represented in Eastern paths. The scientific, the logical, the organized force is considered the male aspect. Upon mixing the two, you create an even greater pool of power and wisdom. And that's a fairly good philosophy. That's where I'm looking into right now. It could be that I find that that's bullshit too. I won't know it until I've tried it, but I'm not an atheist and I don't worship the devil. I don't believe in the Christian devil. I don't believe in the Christian God. I don't care about the Christian God. I don't care about the Bible. I've read the Bible 5, 6 times. There's really not that much in it that makes any sense to me. There are a few verses and passages that I mix into my studies, and there are plenty of scriptures that weren't included in the Bible, but probably should have, that are more reliable than any of the things that got canonized by the Catholics. And the young earth creationists look at the KJV and say, this is the real scientific manuscript of the world. They don't understand the books that they're using are just a retranslation of the original Catholic Bible. While at the same time, a lot of these people think the Catholic Church and the Pope is the Antichrist, which makes no sense whatsoever. If they want to do that, they might as well go through all the other books that were categorized for possible inclusion and make their own sort of Council of Nicaea, circa 2013. That's what they should do if they really want to look at it in a proper light. But no, I'm not a Satanist anymore, but Satanists don't worship the devil either. My personal belief at this time, first, one more thing. So many people, so many Christians and Muslims have come to me and they've said, you've changed your religion. That just shows that you're not competent, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're not confirmed in your beliefs and you're still questioning, and I'll pray for you and I wish you well, to come back to Jebus, to come back to Jehovah. And they say all of these things. They say basically the fact that I've changed my religious views over time is evidence that I'm not confirmed in my beliefs, and evidence that I'm just a little lost lamb who needs guidance. That couldn't be further from the truth. These people are stubborn. They believe that the one book they were raised with is the only way to heaven and the only way to live their life. Most of the time, they won't even study outside religions. If they do, they study it from their own Christian background or their own Islamic background, and they get a completely biased report of these pagan groups or these religions other than their own. And these biased sources don't know what they're talking about, because to them, when a hardcore evangelical Christian studies some pagan society and its beliefs, they're going in with a mind to the fact that that group is worshiping the devil and evil and wrong and needs to be converted to Christianity, whatever branch of Christianity they happen to hold dear. The Muslims do the same thing. The problem with all of these Christian and Islamic scholars that people crow about all the time, and all of these young earth so-called scientists, none of which seem to actually have a scientific degree, is that they have so much personal bias and they have such a vested interest in making the world around them conform to their presuppositions and beliefs that they're not looking at it with a clear eye. They don't challenge their own beliefs. You challenge the average pagan on their beliefs, they'll chuckle and laugh with you, and they'll maybe hold a debate. They might get kind of fiery, but they're not going to fly off the deep end and start calling you names most of the time. Why? Because they don't believe in all of this nonsense that they have the only one inerrant truth. Most religions in the past did not believe there was one inerrant truth. Most of the civilized societies of the ancient world understood henotheism. The henotheistic principle is that we're worshiping a specific set of gods. But the gods of this other pagan group, we may not be worshiping them, but they could be real. And in some cases, they went one further, like the Romans or the Greeks. They actually took gods from other cultures and started venerating them too. And in latter days, they would find similarities between the two pantheons, compare them, and then they would say, well, what we're worshiping as Zeus, you call Jupiter, between Greece and Rome. They're the same thing, they're just sort of different names, different aspects, different rituals and traditions, but they're basically the same thing. Some of the philosophers of that time actually said that the Christian Jehovah, the Father God, was basically Zeus. And this was the reigning principle for centuries, which people don't seem to understand. And they said, well, all those other gods are they're either sort of angels and demons, or maybe they're expressions of the same God. They're different psychological aspects of this same God, but really it's just Zeus, Jupiter, Jehovah. They're kind of the same thing. They say the same thing about, Ahura Mazda, or any of these other deities. They'd say, well, this is the creative, the male, divine force. That's not the way that Christians do it nowadays. That's not the way Muslims do it. They think they have the one inerrant way, and they're so concerned with us poor, miserable, lost sinners that they spend an inordinate amount of time trying to debate us over our beliefs. They honestly, see, you've got to understand it from their perspective, and I can pity them for this. They believe I'm going to suffer forever. They think that upon dying, however I die, whenever I die, I'm going to be bathed in a lake of fire for all eternity. I've tried to explain why this doesn't bother me, because their hell doesn't exist, because their Bible, other than Revelation, doesn't talk about an actual location of the afterlife being hell. It talks rather metaphorically about Gehenna. It talks about Sheol, which most Christians have not studied Jewish philosophy and theology. They don't understand what Sheol means. They're taking the Christian concept of hell, which is derived from Tartarus, from Greece, and from a bunch of other things jumbled together, and they're trying to reapply it to an even older religious group called Judaism, which has no conception of such a location. Which is why it doesn't bother me. They honestly believe I'll suffer forever because of a passage in Revelation that's talking of a metaphor within a metaphor about the fall of Rome, about Satan, who, by the way, is a totally different deity from what Christians believe, and is actually a pagan force. They have no clue what's going on. Their belief in the KJV, or whichever other version they happen to use, as the one inerrant truth of God, is blinding them. That's why I don't take offense when they try to convert me. I understand why they're trying to do it. I say they're deluded. They're clearly wrong. They haven't studied the proper materials to understand what hell is, to understand what Satan is. They think the world, a lot of these people actually think that the world is 6,000 years old, which, by the way, is a completely American invention. Even the Catholic Church, at this point, has gone beyond young earth creationism. And the Catholics were the original gangsters of keeping it Iron Age and not trying to innovate things back during the medieval era, and suppressed all of Europe for 1,000 years. And the glory of Rome gave way to the Dark Ages, partially because of the existence of Catholicism, which, in opposition to the older pagan groups, didn't like the idea of new technology, of medicine, of surgical procedures. It didn't like the idea of tolerance of other cultures. It liked the idea of spreading by fire and sword, just like Islam. That's why these two groups reigning over the world during the Dark Ages if it weren't for the plague wiping out a great deal of people and for their abandonment of hardcore religion during the Renaissance, then we would have stayed in the Dark Ages forever and probably eventually gone out of existence in Europe and at least the Middle East, where these religious groups were prevalent. Meanwhile, the Chinese, who didn't give a shit what you invented, were inventing gunpowder and supposedly wheeled carts that had sails on them that could go 50 miles an hour across the desert, while Europeans were still using primitive wagons. But that's off topic. The basic point is this. So many people in this world, Christians, Muslims, there are people from other religious backgrounds who think the same thing. They believe they have the one truth. And this makes them deluded and sometimes dangerous. Christians aren't usually dangerous in this day and age. Now it's more Islam. Islamists can be dangerous. The Sunnis, not most of the other groups really no, but the Sunnis, yes. Christians have sort of abandoned the sword. Now they just sort of heckle people on the street corner. They sort of stand up on a stump and yell at gay people that are walking by. They believe they've got the one truth. And as such, they're blind, because their one truth is wrong. Because it's not the result of any of their own study. It's not the result of having... They don't study archaeology. They might listen to some evangelical young earther who rants about how the world's 6,000 years old, and oh, by the way, I found this wheel in the wrong strata, so it must be true. They listen to pseudoscientists, not real scientists. They don't trust real science. These are the kind of people who rant about vaccines causing autism, even though it doesn't. The problem being the older religious forces, the pagans, whatever the case may be, mixed science with spirituality. As a result, the world, you do realize, this is something that people don't seem to realize. Ancient Rome at its peak was no less advanced than the Western world was in the early 1900s. It really wasn't. But for a few inventions that they probably would have invented had Rome not fallen fairly quickly, we'd be 1,000 years ahead of what we are now. Literally. They were developing steam engines during this time period. They were developing primitive rail structures. There are the remnants of several canal systems that included rails, which were used to move ships using horsepower. Yes, they have that. They had automated mill systems, many of them in Rome, that worked with water wheels that could pump out enough grain to feed not only the city of Rome, but all of its outlying districts. These were not stupid people. They achieved this because science and religion, or spirituality, properly said, were not considered antithetical to one another. They were considered complementary. They considered science a legitimate function of spirituality, and they considered spirituality a legitimate function of science. That's why they succeeded. You see the same thing almost every time you see an empire or a powerful culture that suddenly, for some unknown reason, its technology starts advancing at a rapid pace for no reason. And people, sit back in stupefaction, and they look at Rome or Egypt, even Nazi Germany, when they started developing missiles that could fly all over Europe. How did they build these things? It's because they were taking spiritual texts, and the Nazis did this too. They were taking spiritual concepts and applying them to science, and taking scientific concepts and applying them to spirituality. The priest was a scientist. And an incredible leap forward. Every time one of these cultures arises, they make leaps and bounds. There's one counter to this, the so-called Islamic Golden Age, is actually just the result of a bunch of Islamists going across what used to be Rome and reinventing what the Romans had. Therefore, because they occupied that area, people in archaeology look at the remains and they say, oh, well, this must have been invented during, when the Moors were here. Actually, it probably dated to Rome centuries earlier, and they just, they don't have the originals anymore, so they were making replicas of what the Romans had already invented. The Romans were capable of building 10-story tall metal-covered towers and using them as siege engines. They were not stupid people. Any of these cultures combined spirituality with science. That's where they succeeded. So when I look at people like the young earthers who spurn science, or even when I look at scientists and they completely spurn spirituality, I say this is what's holding them back. They should be studying one another's sources and coming to a mutual conclusion. They'd find it works a lot better. Because there is some truth to spirituality, just as there's plenty of truth to science. But when Christians come to me and they tell me, well, I know the way to heaven and you're going to hell and you're worshiping the devil, I sit back and laugh. Literally, I'm in starstruck, wide-eyed wonder at how dumb they are. They have no clue what they're talking about. They've only read one book in their life. That's probably the root of their problems and why they spend all of their time. And I look at this as a mark of my general accomplishment at having, I've accomplished my goals of pushing my agenda when all of these people see me as some sort of terrible enemy and they either insult me and attack my material or they try to convert me. They must see something in me that disturbs them, and the only reason they would see that is they see me as effective against their lies. Maybe even a few of these people react with hostility because I start getting them to question their own faith, which is a good thing because people should. The idea of questioning one's faith was never seen as a bad thing either until the medieval era when they started saying, well, the devil's going to, sodomize you with a cow leg if you question your faith, and if you renounce God, you're going to suffer forever. It's really stupid, and it doesn't bother me. It just makes